The question of whether or not God exists is a common question that many people ask. And the existence of God is one that is heavily debated between believers in a higher power and skeptics and atheists. And many times people who don't believe in God will ask for hard evidence for his existence. And they'll challenge Christians and tell them, "Show me proof and I'll believe." And to be honest, Christians can't give hard evidence that God does exist. However, just because believers can't show God physically, it doesn't mean there aren't any good reasons to believe in God. So in this video, I want to cover 3 reasons why people can believe in God. However, I should mention that these arguments should not be abused. For example, many people can enter into a debate of sorts and have the mentality to win and will refuse to listen to the other person and will only look for moments to make the other person look stupid for their lack of knowledge. Even now as I write, I know many people will watch this video with the mentality to prove all these reasons for God's existence wrong. And they'll show it in the comments. And that's honestly fine. But know that if you're a Christian, know that these 3 arguments that I'm about to cover are meant to promote discussion and to get people to consider that God may actually exist. So should you use them, be humble about it. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching our videos, and if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, I recently made a new design for some of our shirts and sweaters. With our Impact logo, I attached the Japanese phrase chotozutsu, which is translated little by little. So if you'd like one, or if you'd like to support us in this way, you can click the link in the description below.
We'll get back to the video in just a sec. First, have you ever read a news story and thought, is this really true? Am I getting the full picture? Unfortunately, today's media is full of bias, and social media only reinforces it by showing people what they want to see. So how do you find the truth? Well, that's where Ground News comes in. This website and app collect news from across the political spectrum, offering visual breakdowns of bias, reliability, and ownership. So instead of being stuck in one perspective, you get a full range of viewpoints to make informed decisions. I found this especially useful when analyzing the recent AI summit in Paris. Ground News shows that 74 sources reported on this story, giving a broad range of perspectives. The bias breakdown shows that 37% of sources lean left, 28% are center, and 35% lean right, making the overall coverage slightly left-leaning. Ground News also rates the factual reliability of sources, showing that this story's coverage is 80% accurate. But here's where it gets really interesting. Let's compare how different sources framed this story. Real Clear Politics, which leans right, headlines it as DeepSeek AI escalates fight to innovate. Meanwhile, left-leaning source Fast Company asks, what exactly is the point of the AI Action Summit? You can see the contrast. One highlights innovation while the other questions the event's purpose. And with features like the blind spot feed, which highlights stories overlooked by media on both sides, Ground News helps you see the full picture. If you want to take control of your news consumption and get a more balanced view of the world, check out Ground News. Right now, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan for unlimited access by subscribing through our link. Go to ground.news/IVM or scan the QR code on screen. Don't just take the headlines at face value, see the bigger picture. Subscribe and start making informed decisions today. That's ground.news/IVM. Okay, back to the video.
Argument number 1, the creation argument. This argument is also known as the cosmological argument. And while I could go through the argument in detail, where I go through each premise, I think it's better to explain it in a way that you can use it in a conversation. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, that's fine. All you need to know is that I'm going to break down this argument simply because you don't really need to know the premises unless you're in an actual debate. So the creation argument essentially states that everything that begins to exist must have a reason for its existence. So since that's the case, we as people should also have a reason for our existence. So this is the way it works. Everything that we see has a cause for its existence. For example, we can look at a building and we can safely assume that there were architects and construction workers that were responsible for making it. On top of that, paintings come from artists, dishes come from chefs, and forests come from seeds, and mountains come from the Earth's tectonic plates moving. So the idea is that all that we see needed to have some kind of cause, and our universe isn't any different. According to science, our universe is expanding, and if it's continuously expanding, then if we were to rewind time, there had to have been a point in which everything started. So the question is, how did everything begin? And the answer to this question is still a mystery in science because we obviously can't go back and observe how life actually began. So the creation argument pretty much states that because things exist, things like the universe and its galaxies, stars, and planets, and the Earth with its land, seas, and people, then something or someone had to be responsible for its existence. And while people may argue and say, Well, maybe the universe was just always here. To that, I'd say that the universe expanding is proof that our universe isn't infinite, because it all had to start at a single point in history. Because from what we know and observe from the universe, that's the most logical conclusion we can come to. So if the universe and everything in it seems to have needed a cause or reason to exist, then God or some higher power seems to be the only explanation that makes sense. And I know some people will say, you Christians look at the unknown and turn off your minds and credit the unknown to God. At least scientists are out there observing and trying to figure everything out. You know, back when I was in college, I sat in one of my friend's classes, and JP Moreland was the professor, and he taught his class something interesting. And he stated that the origin of the universe is outside the realm of science. And the reason why is because science is based on the scientific method, or in other words, it relies solely on us making observations of the world around us. So due to the fact that time, space, and matter all began at a single point in time, a point in time that no one can go back and observe, science then cannot answer the question of how the universe began. So Moreland, the professor, then asserted that the question of how the universe began should actually be answered in the realm of philosophy, not science. And I thought that was interesting. For me personally, if someone were to tell me, you're just turning off your mind and crediting the unknown to God, I'd respond, I'm not turning off my mind. I just think that a higher power that is greater than time, space, and matter can only be responsible for creating the universe that we observe today. Do you have a better explanation on why everything exists today? Because if you do, then I'd love to listen and I'm willing to learn. So if you're watching this and you're someone who does not believe in God, I'd challenge you and ask, how do you think we all came to exist? Because I think there needs to be some explanation on why we all exist, and I think that God creating everything seems the most likely and logical. And if you're a Christian and you're wondering how to use this argument in a conversation, you can simply ask people, where do you think we all came from? And how do you think the universe began? Because it did not just pop into existence, something or someone needed to have caused it. And if they argue and say, well, how do we know that? Things can just pop into existence, and that might be the case for the universe. To that, I'd probably say that we don't observe things popping in and out of existence freely in our day-to-day lives. So if that's the case, there needs to be a cause for the existence of our universe. And should people ask, well, who created God then? To help with that question, you can watch our video titled, Who Created God? Argument number 2, the design argument. This argument is also known as the teleological argument. And in the same way that I skipped explaining the premises for the creation argument, I'll also skip that here, because the goal for this video isn't to prepare debaters, but to help Christians understand these arguments so that they can better be used in a conversation. So this argument pretty much states that complex and intelligent design must come from an intelligent mind or designer. So let's look at the complexity of people. And I cover this in our Is There Really a God video. And in it, I talk about how within a single person, they have a cardiovascular system, an endocrine system, a digestive, respiratory, excretory, lymphatic, nervous, muscular, and skeletal system. And on top of that, according to the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, the DNA from one of our cells is 6 feet long. So if we were to uncoil all of the DNA from all of our cells, it would amount to being 67 billion miles long. And to give you a better idea of that length, we could take 150,000 round trips to the moon with that much DNA, and that's just the DNA of one person. So the design argument would suggest that a person is too complex, and evolution could not have been the reason why people exist, regardless of how many billions of years occur. For example, it would be nonsense to think that a laptop in a forest got there by evolution. Because even if all the necessary parts of a laptop were in an area, and that area was untouched, and nature just had its way for billions of years, a working laptop would not be the result. Yet many people who believe in evolution use this line of reasoning for people, and they'll suggest that the building blocks for people were in an area, and over time, an organism formed, and from that, it kept evolving until we got to people. And I do want to add that I do find a lot of credibility in evolution within a species. Like Darwin's finches, for example. Finches do evolve over time, but they don't become anything other than birds. And we do have wolves that mate with lesser violent canines. And evolution can create a bunch of different types of dogs. However, they stay dogs. It's evolution that turns species into other species, like fishes turning into birds and birds turning into dogs, that I would disagree with. And the reason why is because in our fossil record, I don't recall seeing much of any transitional species that were in the middle of evolving. So going back to the argument of design, complex and intelligent design requires a complex designer. So when you look at the complexity of people and all that makes up a single person, this kind of complexity had to have come from some higher power. So if you're someone that doesn't believe in God and you think that evolution makes more sense and that people did evolve, I would challenge you to think of a time when life can come from non-life. Or in other words, if evolution did start everything and the world started with a bunch of non-living things that people ultimately evolved from, can you think of another time when life was able to emerge from something that wasn't alive? Because if that's not the case, then where did life begin? You could say you just don't know, but I think that the most logical explanation is life coming from some originator of life. And I would call this originator of life God. And if you're a Christian and you're wondering how you can use this argument in a conversation, I would encourage you to ask a lot of questions on what someone believes regarding the complexity of life. And I'd say something along the lines of, people are incredibly complex. Where do you think we came from, and how do you think life started? In my personal podcast, Practical Christianity, I interviewed my friend who works as a chemist, and I asked him what his view on evolution was. And he told me that as a chemist, he works hard to make sure that the chemicals he creates all have the correct measurements. So if his chemicals and complex compounds that he makes all require intelligence, he thinks that since the world and people have so much more complexity than the chemicals he makes, it only makes sense that a mind of greater intelligence is responsible for creating it. And argument number 3, the moral argument. This argument pretty much states that because people have universal laws that they all abide by, it's evidence of God, because he had to give people these laws. To explain it more, murdering babies, purposefully polluting water reservoirs, and other crimes like rape are wrong. And while that seems obvious that they're wrong, the question is, why do we think they're wrong? The moral argument suggests that these moral laws can't develop from a purely biological world, and that these morals need to come from a higher power or God. And the reason why is because if there was no God and we were purely biological beings, then we'd be no different than animals. Because lions can kill gazelles and dogs can go have sex with other dogs without their consent, but lions don't murder gazelles and dogs don't rape other dogs. They're just acting like animals. So to really think about this argument, we need to consider why we as people think that things are wrong. Because if we truly did believe that our world was purely biological, then we couldn't say that what Hitler did was wrong. And according to the Holocaust Encyclopedia, Nazi Germany did not just kill Jewish people. They also killed Black people, gay men, people with disabilities, and their political opponents. So think about this. If morals were not given to us by God, then the rules we have as a society would be subjective. Meaning, what's wrong for me may not be wrong for other people, and we could then respectfully disagree. But this moral argument suggests that there are things that we can't respectfully disagree with. Like, we can't respectfully disagree with Hitler. What he did was morally wrong. But if we lived in a purely biological world, I'd argue that we couldn't say that he was wrong, because he was just doing what was right for him. And people could argue that objective moral values could emerge from a society, but if objective moral values did begin within a society, how would we know which moral values to defend? Because different moral values could technically arise that contradict other ones. So how do we know rape is wrong? And if it is wrong, then how do we know it should stay wrong? I don't think the idea of objective moral values developing within a society answers this question. So all that to say, the moral argument states that because we have moral values that all our societies hold, values such as not murdering and raping people, it's indicative of some higher being giving us those values. So if you don't believe in God, I would challenge you to think of where your conscience came from. Like, you have a sense of right and wrong. So where did that come from? And why is it that humans are different from animals? And why can't we just kill and have sex with whoever we want to? Because I think that the best explanation for why we have this innate sense of right and wrong is because God put inside all of us a conscience that sees and holds universal and moral laws. And if you're a Christian and you want to use this argument in a conversation, I would encourage you to ask questions like, where do you think we got our sense of right and wrong? And do you think what Hitler did was wrong? And why do you think that? And do you think it's possible that we got our sense of right and wrong from God? And if not, why do you think that? And how did you come to that conclusion? Okay? So if you're wondering if God does exist, I would encourage you to consider these three arguments: the creation argument, the design argument, and the moral argument. Now, I should mention that these arguments do not argue the existence of the Christian God. I'll actually cover those arguments in another video. But if anything, these arguments provide a good start when it comes to conversing with people about the possibility of God's existence. Most of the time when I talk to people about God, I found that most people do believe in some type of God. And if that's the case, I'll jump into specific arguments that support Christianity. But if they don't believe in a God, then I'll cover one or all three of these arguments. And honestly, these arguments should not be used to prove people wrong, but to start a discussion on what they believe. And most of the time, if you're humble and kind, people will listen to you and respectfully disagree. So all that to say, if you do end up using these arguments, I would encourage you to use them in humility and in love. And if you don't believe in God, please know that my heart in writing this video is for you to see that there is some thought on why Christians can believe in a higher power. And whether you believe in him or not, I want you to know that Jesus loves you. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching our video, and if it blessed you, please consider liking, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell. Also, I wanted to give a huge shout out to the team listed below. Their hard work makes our ministry possible, so please support them and click their links in the description below. And if you didn't know, I started my own personal podcast called Practical Christianity, so if you'd like to support me, please check it out and subscribe. The link is also in the description below. Also, I want to say thank you to our newest members. Honestly, every bit of support helps so much when it comes to making videos. And if you'd like to support us in the work that we're doing, please consider becoming a member. For the price of a cup of coffee each month, you can help support us in our mission to spread God's word through our videos. So again, thank you so much for all your support, and we'll see you guys next time. God bless.